Good morning, everyone. Wish you are all fine. Today I will start with a new grammar chapter entitled Noun Clauses. But before I talk about this lesson, let me remind you of what a clause is. A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. What is a noun clause? A noun clause is a dependent clause that acts as a noun. It starts with a question word such as how, that, what, when, where, which, who, whom, whose, and why. A noun clause has its own subject and verb. As you all know, that a dependent clause is not a complete sentence since it doesn't carry a full meaning. A noun clause is always a dependent clause which functions as a noun. It always starts with any of the question words which I mentioned in the definition. In addition, a noun clause has its own subject and verb. A noun clause follows such expressions: I don't know, I wonder, can you tell me, does anyone know, do you know, please tell me, etc. All these expressions are followed by noun clauses. A noun clause is never a question. It should act as a statement where the subject precedes the verb. As you noticed here, that a noun clause cannot be a question. It shouldn't have any question word order, but it should act as a statement in which the subject comes before the verb. In questions, verbs precede subjects, whereas in statements, subjects precede verbs. Here are some examples on noun clauses. Let's read them together. Number 1, where does he live? Is an information question since it started with this WH word, where. It has does, which is an auxiliary verb in the simple present tense. It preceded or came before the subject pronoun he, which is singular. Live is a main verb which is part of the simple present tense, and it's in the simple form because does is added to the question. Let's change it to a noun clause. I started with I don't know, this expression. I continued with where, which I kept as it is. Since it's a WH word, I omitted does from the noun clause since noun clauses are never questions. I continued with the subject he, and then I ended with the verb lives after adding s to it when I omitted does from the noun clause. Where he lives is a noun clause in which he is the subject and lives is a verb. Number 2, when did they leave is another information question which started with when. It includes did, which is an auxiliary verb in the simple past tense. It also preceded the subject pronoun they, and leave here is part of the verb. It's in the simple form or base form since did is added to the question. Let's change it to a noun clause. I started with a question form. Can anyone tell me when they left? When they left is a noun clause in which they is the subject and left is the verb. As you noticed here, I continued with when, then the subject pronoun they, and I omitted did. After omitting did, I changed leave from the simple form to the simple past left. As you noticed here, I ended this part with a question mark because the first part is a question. Changing information questions to noun clauses. Information questions are questions that start with any of the following question words: when, where, why, how, what, who, whom, whose, and which. Here are some examples of changing information questions to noun clauses. Number 1, why is Robin absent? Is an information information question that started with why. As you noticed, is preceded the subject Robin since it's a question form. Let's change it to a noun clause. I started with I wonder why Robin is absent. This is a noun clause in which Robin is the subject and is the verb. As you notice, the subject here preceded the verb because it acts as a statement. Number 2, what happened is another information question that started with what. What here is the subject. Happened is the verb. When what is the subject of the information question, keep in mind that it should stay as it is in the noun clause without making any changes. Let's change it to a noun clause. I started with a question form. Can anyone tell me what happened? What happened here stays as it is, since what is the subject of this information question. So, what is the subject here of the noun clause, and happened is the verb. And as you noticed, I ended it with a question mark because the first part, can anyone tell me, acts as a question. Number 3, what did she say is another information question in which what is a WH word which introduces this question, but it's not its subject. The subject here is the pronoun she. Did is in the simple past, and say is part of this tense and verb, and it's in the simple form because did is used in the question. Let's change it to a noun clause. I started with please tell me what she said. What she said is a noun clause in which she is the subject and said is the verb in the simple past. After omitting did, I changed say to the simple past said. Number 4, who is that boy is another information question that started with who. Who here is not the subject, that boy is the subject. Let's change it to a noun clause. I started with a question form. Do you know who that boy is? Who that boy is a noun clause in which that boy is the subject and is the verb. I ended it with a question mark because the first part, do you know, acts as a question. Number 5, whose pen is this is another information question in which whose pen is not the subject. We have this here a subject and is the verb. So I changed it to a noun clause by starting with tell me whose pen this is. Whose pen this is a noun clause in which this is the subject and is the verb. Number 6, who is in the office is an information question in which the WH word who is the subject. Is the verb. In the office is a prepositional phrase since it has a preposition in and its object, which is the office. Together they form a prepositional phrase. Since who is the subject of the information question, it should stay as it is in the noun clause without making any changes. I started with I wonder who is in the office. I kept it as it is because it is the subject of the information question. Who is the subject of this noun clause and is its verb. Number 7, whose keys are on the counter is the same as number 6. Whose keys here is the subject of the information question. Are is the verb. On the counter is a prepositional phrase. So it should stay as it is in the noun clause without making any changes. I started the noun clause started the first part with a question form. Does anyone know whose keys are on the counter? So whose keys are on the counter is a noun clause in which whose keys is the subject and are is the verb. I ended it with a question mark because the first part, does anyone know, acts as a question. Your assignment for next time is to do exercise 2 on page 370, exercises 4 and 5 on pages 372 and 373, and exercise 7 on page 374. Thank you for listening.